Have you ever witnessed a moment of pure courage that completely changed your perspective on someone? Maybe you were in a restaurant, at work, or somewhere in your own city when you saw someone stand up for what's right, even when it could cost them everything. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and if you've ever seen someone risk it all to protect a stranger. Vincenzo Romano preferred corner tables for a reason. From booth 17 at Bellinate, he could see every entrance, every exit, and every face that walked through the mahogany doors of his most profitable restaurant. The soft lighting cast shadows that concealed as much as they revealed, which suited a man whose business dealings required discretion. At 34, Vincenzo had learned that survival in his world meant never sitting with your back to a room. The restaurant hummed with the quiet efficiency he demanded from all his establishments. Crystal glasses caught the warm light from the wrought iron chandeliers, and the scent of garlic and fresh herbs drifted from the kitchen where his chef prepared dishes that had earned Bellinate a reputation extending far beyond Little Italy. Everything moved like clockwork, exactly as Vincenzo required. 8 feet away, his daughter Isabella sat at a smaller table, her dark hair falling in waves over her shoulders as she carefully cut her chicken parmigiana into precise pieces. At 8 years old, she possessed the same focused intensity that had made her father successful, though she applied it to homework and proper table manners rather than the intricate web of business relationships that occupied his thoughts. Vincenzo glanced at his watch. 7:30 on a Wednesday evening, and the dinner crowd was beginning to thin. Marco, his second-in-command, sat across from him reviewing the weekly reports from their other businesses, his voice low as he discussed numbers that would never appear on any official ledger. The legitimate restaurants provided excellent cover for their other operations, and Bellinate had been particularly profitable this quarter. Isabella looked up from her homework and caught his eye, offering him a smile that reminded him painfully of Elena. His wife had been gone for 3 years, but their daughter carried her mother's grace and warmth like a living memorial. He smiled back, then returned his attention to Marco's report about the dock situation. That was when the shouting started. Derek Morrison, the restaurant manager, stood over Isabella's table with his face flushed red, his voice carrying across the dining room despite the background music. The man was barely 30, with thinning brown hair and a perpetually anxious expression that had grown worse since Vincenzo started observing his management style more closely. "You clumsy little brat," Derek snapped, gesturing wildly at the small puddle of water near Isabella's plate. "Look what you've done to the tablecloth. Do you have any idea how much it costs to get these properly cleaned?" Isabella's eyes went wide with surprise and hurt. She had knocked over her water glass while reaching for her homework folder. Nothing more than a simple accident. The kind of thing that happened to children every day. But Derek continued his tirade, his voice growing louder and attracting stares from other diners. "Maybe your father should teach you some manners before he brings you to nice places like this," Derek continued, oblivious to the dangerous territory he was entering. "Some people clearly don't know how to behave in civilized society." Vincenzo's hand tightened around his wine glass. Marco noticed immediately, his own body tensing as he recognized the warning signs. When Vincenzo's expression went completely still like that, when his dark eyes took on that particular flatness, smart men prepared for violence. But before Vincenzo could move, someone else intervened. "Excuse me," said a clear, firm voice. "That's absolutely unacceptable." A young woman approached Derek with quick, determined steps. She was probably in her mid-20s, with long black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and olive skin that suggested Mediterranean or Asian heritage. Her server's uniform was crisp and professional, but what caught Vincenzo's attention was the steel in her spine as she positioned herself between Derek and Isabella. "You do not speak to a child that way," the waitress continued, her voice controlled but carrying clearly across the now silent dining room. She had an accent that was pure Boston, with just a hint of something else underneath. "Ever. She's 8 years old and she had an accident. You apologize to her right now." Derek whirled around, his face darkening further when he saw who was challenging him. Sophia Chen, one of the newer servers, someone he clearly thought he could intimidate. He was wrong. "Stay out of this, Chen," Derek snarled. "This isn't your section and it's not your business." Go back to your tables before I write you up for insubordination. Sophia stepped closer to Isabella, her hand coming to rest gently on the little girl's shoulder. My business is making sure every guest in this restaurant feels welcome and respected. That includes children who deserve basic human decency from the staff. Vincenzo watched, fascinated despite his anger, as this young woman faced down a man who outranked her, who could fire her with a word, all to protect a child she didn't even know. Isabella looked up at Sophia with something like wonder, clearly unused to having strangers defend her so fiercely. Derek's voice dropped to a vicious whisper, but in the silent restaurant it carried perfectly. You're fired, Chin. Clean out your locker and get out. And don't expect a reference, because I'll make sure everyone in the industry knows what a troublemaker you are. Sophia's chin lifted another inch. Fine. But you still owe this little girl an apology. The silence stretched tight as a wire. Other diners watched openly now, some reaching for their phones to record what was clearly becoming a dramatic confrontation. Vincenzo could see the exact moment when Derek realized he had an audience, when his angry bluster began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny. But Sophia wasn't finished. She knelt down beside Isabella's chair, bringing herself to eye level with the frightened child. Hey, sweetheart, she said gently, her voice completely different now, warm and reassuring. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes adults have bad days and they forget their manners. But you're perfect just the way you are. Isabella nodded solemnly, her dark eyes bright with unshed tears. Thank you for helping me, she whispered. Vincenzo felt something shift in his chest, some long-frozen part of himself responding to the genuine kindness in this stranger's voice. When was the last time someone had shown such immediate care for his daughter? When was the last time anyone had risked something important to protect Isabella without knowing who she was, without expecting anything in return? Sophia stood and faced Derek again, her moment of tenderness with Isabella making her subsequent coldness toward the manager even more striking. She was magnificent in her fury, righteous and uncompromising, and Vincenzo found himself leaning forward slightly to better observe this unexpected development. That was when he decided Derek Morrison's employment at Bellinate had just ended permanently. Vincenzo rose from his booth with the fluid grace that came from years of commanding rooms full of dangerous men. The movement caught Derek's attention immediately, and the manager's face went from red to pale in the space of a heartbeat. Marco remained seated but shifted subtly, ready to follow his boss's lead. Mr. Romano, Derek stammered, suddenly remembering exactly who owned the restaurant he worked in. I was just handling a situation with the staff and... Vincenzo walked past Derek without acknowledging him, moving instead to Isabella's table where Sophia still stood protectively near his daughter. Up close, he could see that the waitress was even more striking than he had initially realized. Her eyes were a warm brown flecked with gold, and there was an intelligence there that matched the courage she had just displayed. Isabella, Vincenzo said softly, are you all right, Piccola? His daughter nodded, then looked up at Sophia with obvious admiration. This lady helped me, Papa. She was really brave. Yes, Vincenzo agreed, his eyes never leaving Sophia's face. She was very brave. Sophia looked between father and daughter, and he could see the moment when she made the connection. Her eyes widened slightly as she took in his expensive suit, the way other staff members had begun to gather at a respectful distance, the aura of controlled power that he had never learned to completely suppress. You're her father, Sophia said, and it wasn't really a question. Vincenzo Romano, he replied, extending his hand. And you are? Sophia Chin. She accepted his handshake, and he noted that her grip was firm, confident. Her skin was soft, but her palms showed the calluses of someone who worked hard for a living. I'm sorry if I overstepped, but someone needed to. You did exactly what needed to be done, Vincenzo interrupted. Thank you for protecting my daughter. He turned then to face Derek, who had been standing frozen nearby, clearly trying to process this reversal of fortune. The manager's face had gone through several color changes as he realized that he had just publicly berated the boss's daughter and then fired the woman who defended her. Derek, Vincenzo said conversationally, you're fired. Clean out your office and leave immediately. Security will escort you out. But Mr. Romano, Derek began desperately, I didn't know she was your daughter. If I had known. Exactly, Vincenzo replied, his voice still perfectly calm. You didn't know, but you treated her that way anyway. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. Marco appeared at Derek's elbow with two other men, their presence making it clear that this was not a negotiable situation. The former manager was escorted through the kitchen toward the back office, his protests fading as he disappeared from view. Vincenzo turned back to Sofia, who was watching the proceedings with a mixture of satisfaction and apprehension. She had won this particular battle, but she was clearly beginning to understand that she might have attracted more attention than she bargained for. Miss Chun, Vincenzo said, his tone shifting to something warmer, more personal. I believe Derek mentioned something about firing you. Fortunately, Derek no longer has that authority. In fact, Derek no longer works here at all. Sofia's eyebrows rose. So I still have a job? You do. In fact, I'd like to offer you Derek's position. Bellinate needs a new manager. Someone who understands that our guests deserve respect regardless of their age. Someone with the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. The offer hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond a simple promotion. Sofia looked down at Isabella, who was watching their conversation with bright, hopeful eyes, then back up at Vincenzo. I don't know anything about restaurant management, Sofia said carefully. You know about treating people with dignity, Vincenzo replied. The rest can be taught. What matters is character, and you've already proven you have that in abundance. He could see her thinking, weighing options and consequences. This was clearly not what she had expected when she came to work tonight. But there was something else in her eyes too, something that looked almost like recognition, as if she sensed that this moment was important, that it might change everything. I need to think about it, Sofia said finally. Of course, Vincenzo agreed. Take all the time you need, but I hope you'll consider it seriously. Isabella seems to have taken quite a liking to you. As if summoned by her name, Isabella looked up at Sofia with the kind of direct, innocent question that only children could ask. Will you come back tomorrow? I want to show you my drawings. Sofia's expression softened completely. She knelt down again, bringing herself back to Isabella's eye level. I'll be here tomorrow, sweetheart. Promise. When she stood this time, Vincenzo caught her eye and held it for a moment longer than strictly necessary. Thank you, he said simply, but the words carried weight that made her cheeks flush slightly. You're welcome, Sofia replied, and then she was walking away, returning to her other tables with the same professional composure she had shown throughout the entire confrontation. Vincenzo watched her go, noting the graceful way she moved, the warm smile she offered to other guests, the easy competence with which she handled her duties. She was exactly what Bellinate needed, what Isabella needed, what he, if he was being honest with himself, might need as well. Isabella tugged at his sleeve, reclaiming his attention. Papa, I like her. She's nice. Yes, Vincenzo agreed, settling back into his chair beside his daughter. She is very nice indeed. As the restaurant returned to its normal rhythm around them, Vincenzo found his thoughts returning again and again to the young woman who had risked her job to defend his child. There had been something almost fierce in her protectiveness, something that spoke to instincts he recognized in himself. She was a guardian, a protector, someone who would stand between the innocent and harm without counting the cost to herself. In his world, such people were rare and precious. And if Sofia Chun was half as remarkable as this first impression suggested, Vincenzo was very much looking forward to getting to know her better. Sofia Chun arrived at Bellinate the next evening with a mixture of determination and nervous energy that had kept her awake most of the night. The events of the previous day felt surreal in the harsh light of morning, like something that had happened to someone else entirely. But the business card in her purse, embossed with Vincenzo Romano's name and contact information, proved that her dramatic confrontation with Derek Morrison had been entirely real. She had spent hours researching Vincenzo online, finding surprisingly little concrete information about his business interests beyond the restaurants. There were society page photos from charity events, mentions of substantial donations to children's hospitals, and a few brief articles about his wife's tragic death in a car accident 3 years prior. Nothing definitively suspicious, but nothing that explained the aura of controlled power she had sensed when he stood up for her. The restaurant was busy for a Tuesday evening, filled with well-dressed diners enjoying expensive wine and conversation that hummed at the perfect volume for an upscale establishment. Sophia moved between her assigned tables with professional efficiency, but part of her attention remained focused on the corner booth, where Isabella sat working on homework while occasionally glancing up to scan the room. The little girl looked different tonight, somehow smaller and more vulnerable without her father's protective presence nearby. She wore a navy blue dress with a white collar that made her look like she was dressed for private school. Her dark hair held back with a silver barrette that caught the light from the chandeliers. During a brief lull between orders, Sophia found herself approaching Isabella's table with a glass of milk and a small plate of the restaurant's signature bread. "I thought you might be getting hungry," Sophia said, setting the items down with a warm smile. "Your homework looks very serious tonight." Isabella looked up from her math worksheet with obvious relief at the interruption. "It's fractions, which are basically impossible. I don't understand why anyone needs to know what 3/4 of 8 is in real life." Sophia laughed, remembering her own struggles with elementary school mathematics. "You know what? Fractions are actually really useful in cooking. Like, if a recipe calls for 1 cup of flour but you want to make a smaller batch, you need to know what 3/4 of a cup looks like." "Really?" Isabella's eyes lit up with sudden interest. "Really. In fact, if you want, I could show you some cooking tricks that make fractions make more sense. Would you like that?" "Yes, please," Isabella said eagerly. "Papa tries to help with homework, but he's not very good at explaining the easy stuff. He thinks too much like a grown-up." The observation was so astute that Sophia found herself genuinely impressed. This child clearly possessed the kind of intelligence that saw straight through adult complications to the heart of matters. "Well, maybe I can help with the kid stuff while your papa handles the grown-up problems," Sophia suggested. "That would be perfect," Isabella replied with the satisfied air of someone who had just solved a complex logistical challenge. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Vincenzo himself, appearing at their table with the same quiet presence that seemed to shift the entire restaurant's energy. He wore another impeccably tailored suit, this one charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe, and his dark hair was styled with careless perfection that probably took considerable effort to achieve. "Good evening, Miss Chun," Vincenzo said, and his voice carried that same warm undertone that had made her pulse quicken the day before. "I hope Isabella hasn't been monopolizing your time." "Not at all," Sophia replied, acutely aware that several other diners were watching their interaction with obvious curiosity. She was just explaining why fractions matter in real life. Vincenzo's eyebrows rose slightly, an educational approach to mathematics. "I'm impressed. I like her, Papa," Isabella announced with characteristic directness. "She makes more sense than my regular teacher." "High praise indeed," Vincenzo said, though his attention remained focused on Sophia in a way that made her suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. "Miss Chen, when you have a moment, I'd like to discuss the management position we talked about yesterday." "Of course, Mr. Romano. I'll be with you shortly." Sophia finished her current round of table service with hands that trembled slightly, though she couldn't quite identify whether the source was nervousness or anticipation. When she finally approached Vincenzo's booth, he gestured for her to sit across from him with the casual authority of someone accustomed to having his requests immediately honored. "Thank you for considering the position," Vincenzo began without preamble. "I realize yesterday's events were unexpected, and you've had time to think about whether this is something you're truly interested in pursuing." Sophia took a deep breath, gathering the courage she had been building all day. "Mr. Romano, I appreciate the offer, but I have to be honest with you. I'm not sure I understand why you're willing to promote someone you barely know to such an important position." Vincenzo leaned back in his booth, studying her with those dark eyes that seemed to see more than she was comfortable revealing. "It's a fair question. The truth is, Miss Chun, I've been observing this restaurant for several months, looking for someone who understood that hospitality is about more than just serving food. It's about creating an environment where people feel valued and protected. He paused, glancing over at Isabella before continuing. Yesterday, you risked your job to defend a child who was being mistreated. You didn't know who she was, you had no reason to expect any reward for your intervention, but you did it anyway because it was the right thing to do. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. The explanation was reasonable, even compelling, but something in Vincenzo's manner suggested layers of complexity that went far beyond restaurant management. Sophia found herself studying the details that had nagged at her subconscious. The expensive watch, the way staff moved around him with careful deference, the subtle tension in his posture that suggested someone always prepared for potential threats. Character is important, she said carefully, but so is experience. I've been a server for 3 years, Mr. Romano. I've never managed anything more complicated than my own section of tables. Experience can be taught, Vincenzo replied. Good judgment cannot. And you've already demonstrated that you have excellent judgment under pressure. Before Sophia could respond, Isabella appeared at their table with her completed homework and an expression of barely contained excitement. Papa, can Sophia come home with us for dinner sometime? She promised to teach me about cooking fractions, and Mrs. Martinez said I could invite someone special. Isabella, Vincenzo said gently, Miss Chun has her own life and her own plans. We can't just assume she wants to spend her free time with us. Actually, Sophia interrupted, surprised by her own words. I'd love to have dinner with you both, if you're sure it wouldn't be an imposition. The smile that transformed Vincenzo's face was different from his usual controlled expressions, warmer and more genuine in a way that made Sophia suddenly understand why this man commanded such obvious loyalty from his staff. It would be our pleasure, he said. This Saturday, if that works for your schedule. Before Sophia could confirm the arrangement, Vincenzo's attention shifted to something behind her, and his expression immediately went cold and alert. She turned to see a tall man in an ill-fitting suit approaching their table with the aggressive swagger of someone looking to cause trouble. Mr. Romano, the man said loudly enough to attract attention from nearby tables, I need to discuss the Derek Morrison situation with you. There are people who aren't happy about how that was handled. This is neither the time nor the place for business discussions, Vincenzo replied quietly, but there was steel beneath his calm tone. I think it's exactly the right time and place, the man continued, clearly emboldened by the public setting. Derek had friends, Mr. Romano. Friends who don't appreciate seeing good people thrown out on the street without cause. Sophia felt the tension in the air shift dramatically, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Around them, other diners were beginning to notice the confrontation, and she could see several staff members positioning themselves strategically around the dining room. Derek Morrison was fired for inappropriate behavior toward a guest, Vincenzo said, his voice carrying clearly but remaining perfectly controlled. If his friends have concerns about that decision, they're welcome to make an appointment to discuss it during business hours. The visitor leaned closer, lowering his voice but not enough to prevent Sophia from hearing his next words. You might want to be more careful about making enemies, Romano. Accidents happen to people who don't play well with others. The threat was unmistakable, and Sophia felt her blood turn cold as she realized she was witnessing something far more serious than a personnel dispute. But before she could fully process the implications, Vincenzo was standing with fluid grace that somehow managed to be both elegant and menacing. I think you've said everything you came here to say, Vincenzo replied. Marco will escort you out. As if summoned by his name, a broad-shouldered man in a well-tailored suit appeared at the stranger's elbow. Marco's expression was completely neutral, but something about his presence made it clear that leaving was not a suggestion. Think about what I said, the man told Vincenzo as Marco guided him toward the exit. Think real hard about whether that little promotion was worth the trouble it's going to cause. After they were gone, Vincenzo remained standing for a moment, his gaze sweeping the dining room to ensure that normal atmosphere had been restored. When he finally settled back into his seat, Isabella was watching him with the solemn expression of a child who understood more about adult complexities than she should have to. Is everything all right, Papa? Isabella asked quietly. Everything is fine, Piccola, Vincenzo assured her, his voice immediately gentle again. Just some people who don't understand proper business etiquette. But Sofia could see the lingering tension in Vincenzo's shoulders, the way his eyes continued to scan their surroundings with hypervigilant awareness. Whatever world this man inhabited, it was clearly more dangerous than anything she had imagined. Mr. Romano, Sofia said quietly, perhaps we should discuss the management position another time. I don't want to cause problems for you or your business. Vincenzo's attention snapped back to her with laser focus. Miss Chin, let me be very clear about something. The problems you witnessed tonight have nothing to do with you and everything to do with business relationships that existed long before yesterday's incident. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to ensure their conversation remained private. But I want you to understand that if you accept this position, you'll be under my protection. That means no one, not Derek Morrison or his friends or anyone else, will be able to threaten you or interfere with your work here. The words should have been reassuring, but something in the way Vincenzo delivered them sent chills down Sofia's spine. Protection implied the need for protection, which suggested dangers she hadn't fully considered. What exactly are you protecting me from? She asked. Vincenzo was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much truth to reveal. Finally, he spoke with careful precision. I own several businesses in this city, Miss Chun. Some of those businesses operate in competitive markets where not everyone plays by the same rules. Occasionally, that creates complications. But I want to be absolutely clear that my restaurants are legitimate operations staffed by good people who deserve to work in safety. The explanation was both illuminating and frustrating, answering her question while revealing how much she still didn't know about Vincenzo Romano's world. Isabella, apparently bored by the adults' serious conversation, had returned to organizing her homework with the methodical precision of someone much older than 8. Watching her, Sofia felt a surge of protective instinct that had nothing to do with job considerations and everything to do with genuine affection for this remarkable child. Mr. Romano, Sofia said finally, I need you to understand my situation. My mother is sick and needs expensive medical treatment that our insurance doesn't cover. I work 3 jobs just to keep up with the bills, and I live in a studio apartment that's barely big enough for one person. I can't afford to make career decisions based on fear. She paused, gathering her courage for what came next. But I also can't afford to put myself in a situation where I might become a target for people who want to hurt you through your business. So I need to know exactly what I'd be signing up for. Vincenzo nodded slowly, as if her directness pleased him rather than causing offense. That's a fair request. The truth is, managing Bellinate would make you part of my organization, which means you'd have both the benefits and the responsibilities that come with that association. What kind of benefits? Sofia asked. Vincenzo reached into his jacket and withdrew a leather portfolio, extracting a single sheet of paper that he slid across the table. Sofia looked down at what appeared to be a standard employment contract, but the salary figure at the top made her eyes widen dramatically. This can't be right, she said quietly. This is more than I make in a year from all 3 of my jobs combined. It's the standard compensation for restaurant management in my organization, Vincenzo replied matter-of-factly. Additionally, the position includes full health benefits that would cover your mother's medical expenses, 2 weeks of paid vacation, and performance bonuses based on restaurant profitability. Sofia stared at the contract, her mind racing to process implications that went far beyond simple employment. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a lifeline that could solve every financial problem that had dominated her life for the past 2 years. Mr. Romano, she said carefully, this is incredibly generous. But I have to ask why you're willing to pay so much for someone with no management experience. Because I'm not just hiring a restaurant manager, Vincenzo replied. I'm investing in someone I believe has the intelligence and integrity to help me build something lasting. Someone Isabella already trusts and likes. Someone who understands that protecting people is more important than following rules. As if sensing that the conversation concerned her, Isabella looked up from her homework with bright, hopeful eyes. Are you going to stay and help Papa run the restaurant, Sofia? Because I think you'd be really good at it, and then we could have dinner together sometimes. The simple request from Isabella carried more weight than all of Vincenzo's logical arguments combined. This child had already experienced too much loss in her young life. How could Sophia walk away when staying might give Isabella some measure of happiness and stability? But accepting meant entering a world she didn't fully understand, working for a man whose protection came with implications that frightened her even as they attracted her. Vincenzo seemed to sense her internal struggle. He reached across the table and briefly covered her hand with his, the contact warm and surprisingly gentle for someone whose presence commanded such obvious respect and fear. "I know this is a lot to consider," he said quietly, "but I want you to know that everything I do is motivated by a desire to protect the people I care about. Isabella, my family, my employees. If you join us, that protection would extend to you and your mother as well." The touch of his hand sent unexpected heat racing up Sophia's arm, and she suddenly became aware of him not just as a powerful businessman, but as an attractive man whose attention was focused entirely on her. There was something magnetic about Vincenzo Romano, something that drew her despite every rational instinct that warned her to be careful. "I need some time to think about this," Sophia said finally, though part of her already knew what her decision would be. "Of course," Vincenzo replied, releasing her hand though the warmth of his touch lingered on her skin. "Take all the time you need. But I hope you'll consider that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards." As Sophia returned to her regular duties, her mind churned with questions and possibilities. The contract in her purse felt like a passport to a different life, one where financial security wasn't a constant worry and her mother could receive proper medical care without bankrupting them both. But it also felt like a step into unknown territory, a world where protection was necessary and business disputes involved veiled threats from dangerous men. The decision should have been simple. Any rational person would weigh the obvious benefits against the potential risks and make a careful choice based on logic and self-preservation. Instead, Sophia found herself thinking about Isabella's hopeful expression, about Vincenzo's gentle touch and fierce protectiveness, about the possibility of belonging to something larger than her current precarious existence. By the time she went home that night, Sophia had made her choice. She was going to say yes to Vincenzo Romano's proposition, risks and all. Some opportunities were worth the danger they brought with them. Some people were worth taking chances for. And some families, she was beginning to suspect, were worth whatever price you had to pay to become part of them. 2 weeks into her new position as manager of Bellinate, Sophia Chun had discovered that she possessed a natural talent for organization that she never knew existed. The restaurant ran smoother than it had in months, staff morale had improved dramatically, and even the kitchen crew had begun to smile during their shifts. She found herself arriving early and staying late, not because the job demanded it, but because she genuinely loved the work. More than that, she loved spending time with Isabella. The little girl had taken to doing her homework at the corner table most evenings, spreading her books and papers across the mahogany surface while Sophia moved between her managerial duties and helping with math problems. Tonight was no different. Isabella sat with her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she worked through multiplication tables, her dark hair falling forward to frame her face. Sophia glanced at the clock above the bar. 8:15, and the dinner crowd was beginning to thin. Vincenzo would arrive soon for his usual evening check-in, a routine that had developed naturally over the past 2 weeks. He claimed he was simply reviewing the day's operations, but Sophia had begun to suspect he came as much to see Isabella as to discuss business. "What's 7 times 8, Sophia?" Isabella asked, looking up from her homework with the kind of trust that made Sophia's heart squeeze painfully in her chest. "Think about it this way," Sophia said, settling into the chair beside Isabella. "You know that 7 times 7 is 14, right? So 7 times 8 is just 7 more than that." Isabella's face lit up with understanding. 56. "Oh, that's easy when you explain it like that. You're getting really good at this, sweetheart. Your teacher is going to be impressed." Isabella beamed under the praise, then returned to her worksheet with renewed determination. Watching her, Sophia felt that familiar tug of maternal instinct that had grown stronger each day. She had always loved children, had always imagined having a family of her own someday. But caring for Isabella felt different somehow. More natural, more right. The restaurant's front door opened, and Sofia looked up to see Vincenzo entering with his usual quiet confidence. He moved through the dining room like he owned not just the building but everything in it, acknowledging staff with subtle nods and scanning the room with eyes that missed nothing. When his gaze found Isabella and Sofia at their table, his expression softened in a way that made Sofia's pulse quicken unexpectedly. "Papa," Isabella called out, waving him over. "Sofia helped me with my math and I got all the hard problems right." Vincenzo approached their table, and Sofia noticed how the entire restaurant seemed to shift subtly in response to his presence. Conversations became quieter, movements more careful, as if everyone was suddenly aware they were being observed by someone important. "That's wonderful, Piccola," Vincenzo said, leaning down to kiss the top of Isabella's head. "I'm proud of you for working so hard." His eyes met Sofia's over Isabella's bent head, and she felt that same electric awareness that had been building between them for 2 weeks. There was something in the way he looked at her, something warm and appreciative that made her wonder if he was thinking about more than just her managerial skills. "Miss Chun," Vincenzo said, his voice carrying that slight rasp that did disturbing things to her concentration. "How was business today?" "Excellent, actually. We're up 12% from last week, and the new wine selection is proving very popular with our evening guests." She handed him the day's report, their fingers brushing as he took the folder. The contact was brief, probably accidental, but it sent heat racing up her arm nonetheless. Sofia pulled her hand back quickly, hoping he hadn't noticed her reaction. Vincenzo reviewed the numbers with the same focused attention he gave everything, but Sofia caught him glancing at her several times over the top of the pages. When he finished, he set the folder aside and smiled at her with genuine warmth. "Outstanding work, as always. I made the right choice promoting you." The compliment sent a flush of pleasure through her that was entirely disproportionate to the simple words. She had been complimented on her work before, by previous bosses and colleagues, but somehow Vincenzo's approval meant more. Perhaps because she sensed that he was not a man who gave praise lightly. "Papa, can Sofia come to dinner with us this weekend?" Isabella asked suddenly, looking up from her completed math worksheet. "Marco's wife is making that pasta you like, and she said I could invite a friend." "Isabella," Vincenzo said gently, "Sofia has her own life and her own plans. We can't just—" "I'd love to," Sofia interrupted, surprising herself with the speed of her response. "If you're sure it wouldn't be an imposition." The smile that spread across Vincenzo's face was different from his usual controlled expressions. This one reached his eyes, transforming his entire face and making him look younger, more approachable, more dangerous to her peace of mind. "It wouldn't be an imposition at all," he said. "Saturday evening, 7 o'clock. I'll send a car for you." Before Sofia could protest that she was perfectly capable of getting herself to dinner, Vincenzo's phone rang. He glanced at the display and his expression immediately shifted back to business mode. "Excuse me," he said to both of them. "I need to take this." He walked toward the back office, the phone already pressed to his ear. Sofia returned her attention to Isabella, helping her pack up her homework and listening to excited chatter about the weekend dinner plans. But part of her mind remained focused on Vincenzo's retreating figure, wondering about the call that had made his face go so serious so quickly. 20 minutes later, she was reviewing inventory reports in her office when she heard voices from the corridor outside. The door was slightly ajar, and Vincenzo's voice carried clearly through the gap. He was speaking to someone on the phone, his tone entirely different from the warm, gentle voice he used with Isabella. "No, the shipment needs to be delayed until we handle the Moretti situation," Vincenzo was saying. "I don't care what arrangements were made previously. Nothing moves until we take care of their interference permanently." Sofia froze, her pen hovering over the inventory sheet. There was something in Vincenzo's voice, a cold authority that sent chills down her spine. This wasn't the voice of a restaurant owner discussing food deliveries. "Marco thinks a direct approach would be most effective," Vincenzo continued. "I agree. Sometimes the only language these people understand is violence. Make sure it's clean and sends the right message." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with references to territories, families, and consequences that made Sofia's blood run cold. When Vincenzo finally ended the call, she sat in stunned silence, her mind racing to process what she had just overheard. She had suspected, of course. The expensive suits, the way people deferred to him, the casual mention of Derek's unfortunate accident after his firing. But hearing it confirmed so explicitly, hearing him discuss violence with such matter-of-fact calm, made it real in a way that terrified her. Sophia spent the rest of the evening in a daze, going through the motions of closing procedures while her mind replayed every interaction she had ever had with Vincenzo. How many times had he smiled at her while planning someone's destruction? How many tender moments with Isabella had been bracketed by discussions of territory wars and eliminating problems? When she finally arrived home to her small apartment in the North End, Sophia immediately opened her laptop and began searching. Vincenzo Romano Boston. Romano crime family. Isabella Romano mother death. The search results painted a picture that was both more and less than what she had feared. Vincenzo was indeed connected to organized crime, though the articles were careful to use words like alleged and suspected. His wife Elena had died in a car accident 3 years ago, but several sources hinted that it might not have been accidental. There were photographs of Vincenzo at various social events, always impeccably dressed, always surrounded by men who looked like they could handle any kind of trouble. But there were other pictures too. Vincenzo at charity events, particularly those benefiting children's causes. A substantial donation to the pediatric wing of Massachusetts General Hospital, made in Elena's memory. A scholarship fund for underprivileged students, administered quietly through a foundation that bore his wife's name. Sophia stared at the screen until her eyes burned, trying to reconcile the man who had gently helped Isabella with her homework with the one who casually discussed permanent solutions to business problems. By the time she finally went to bed, she had made a decision that terrified her almost as much as staying would have. She was going to quit. The next day at work, Sophia could barely concentrate on her duties. Every time she looked at Isabella, bent over her homework with complete trust and innocence, she felt like she might be sick. How could she continue to be part of this child's life knowing what her father really was? How could she pretend that everything was normal when she had heard him planning what sounded like murder? But when Vincenzo arrived for his evening check-in, one look at his face told her that her internal struggle was not as hidden as she had hoped. "Sophia," he said quietly, "may I speak with you privately?" She nodded, not trusting her voice, and followed him to her office. He closed the door behind them and stood there for a moment, studying her face with those dark eyes that seemed to see everything. "You've been different today," he observed. "Distant. Did something happen?" Sophia took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Yesterday evening, when you were on the phone, I overheard part of your conversation." Vincenzo went very still. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Some subtle alteration that reminded her forcibly that this man was far more dangerous than his expensive suits and gentle manner with his daughter suggested. "I see," he said finally. "And what did you hear, exactly?" "Enough," Sophia replied. "Enough to know that you're not just a restaurant owner. Enough to know that I've been naive about what kind of world I've stepped into." They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of unspoken truths hanging heavy between them. Sophia could see Vincenzo calculating, deciding how much to reveal, how much to deny. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "My business interests extend beyond restaurants, yes. Some of those interests exist in areas that operate by different rules than the legitimate world. But everything I do to protect my family and provide for Isabella's future." "That's not an answer," Sophia said. "That's a justification." Vincenzo moved closer, and she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, more personal than she had ever heard it. "My wife died because of my enemies, Sophia. They planted a bomb in her car because they wanted to send me a message. Isabella was supposed to be with her that day, but Elena had dropped her off at school early for a field trip." The pain in his voice was unmistakable, raw and honest in a way that made Sophia's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. She could see the guilt he carried, the weight of responsibility for a tragedy that had shaped everything that came after. I live in a world where showing weakness gets people killed, Vincenzo continued. Where the only way to protect what you love is to be more dangerous than the people who would take it away. I won't apologize for that, because keeping Isabella safe is worth any price I have to pay. Sophia felt tears prick at her eyes, moved despite herself by the naked vulnerability in his admission. This was the man who had watched her defend his daughter, who had promoted her based on character rather than experience. But it was also the man who had coldly discussed violence as a business solution. I understand why you feel you have to live this way, she said quietly, but I can't be part of it. I can't look at Isabella every day knowing what you do, what you're capable of. She watched something die in Vincenzo's eyes, some hope she hadn't even realized he was carrying. The loss hit her like a physical blow, making her want to take back the words even as she spoke them. I'll give you 2 weeks' notice, she continued, forcing herself to remain steady. That should be enough time to find a replacement. Vincenzo nodded slowly, his expression returning to the controlled mask she remembered from their first meeting. Of course, I understand your position. He turned toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. For what it's worth, Sophia, you've been the best thing to happen to Isabella since her mother died. She's going to be heartbroken. The words hit their target perfectly, making Sophia flinch with the precision of their aim. Before she could respond, Vincenzo had left, closing the door quietly behind him. Sophia sank into her desk chair, her hands shaking as she tried to process what had just happened. She had done the right thing, the safe thing, the smart thing. So why did it feel like she had just made the biggest mistake of her life? The answer came an hour later, when Isabella appeared in her office doorway with tears streaming down her face. Papa says you're leaving, Isabella whispered. He says you found a better job somewhere else. But I don't want you to go, Sophia. I love you. The little girl launched herself into Sophia's arms, sobbing against her shoulder with the kind of heartbroken despair that only children could express. Sophia held her tightly, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and feeling her own heart break into pieces. I love you too, sweetheart, she whispered, so very much. But even as she comforted Isabella, Sophia's mind was spinning with possibilities she didn't want to consider. What if she was wrong to leave? What if Vincenzo's world was more complex than the simple good and devil division she had constructed? What if walking away meant losing not just a job, but a family she was only beginning to understand she wanted? The questions haunted her through the rest of her shift, following her home and keeping her awake long into the night. By morning, she still didn't have answers. But she was beginning to suspect that the choice between safety and love might not be as clear-cut as she had originally believed. 3 days later, Sophia was working her final Friday evening shift when chaos erupted in the restaurant. She was reviewing the weekend reservations when she heard shouting from the dining room, followed by the sound of breaking glass. She rushed out of her office to find a tall, unshaven man in dirty jeans and a stained t-shirt standing near the bar, clearly intoxicated and aggressively confronting one of the servers. Other diners were staring, some rising from their seats in alarm. Where is she? The man was shouting. Where's Sophia? I know she works here, and I need to talk to her right now. Sophia's blood turned to ice as she recognized the voice. Marcus Kellaway, her ex-boyfriend, the man she had spent 6 months trying to forget. The man whose escalating verbal abuse and possessive behavior had finally driven her to break up with him and move to a different neighborhood. Sir, you need to leave immediately, said Tony, one of the senior waiters. This is a private establishment and you're disturbing our guests. Marcus shoved Tony aside with casual violence, sending the older man stumbling into a nearby table. I'm not going anywhere until I talk to Sophia. She owes me money, and I'm not leaving without it. Sophia stepped forward despite every instinct screaming at her to run. Marcus spotted her immediately, his bloodshot eyes lighting up with triumph and anger. There you are, you little bitch, he snarled, weaving slightly as he approached her. You think you can just disappear? You think you can hide from me in some fancy restaurant? Marcus, you need to leave, Sophia said, trying to keep her voice calm and authoritative. We have nothing to discuss, and you're scaring people. The hell we don't have anything to discuss, Marcus spat. You owe me 3 grand for rent and bills from when we lived together. I've been looking for you for months. I don't owe you anything, Sophia replied firmly. I paid my share of everything before I left. You know that. Marcus's face darkened with rage, and he took another step closer. Sophia could smell the alcohol on his breath, see the dangerous glitter in his eyes that she remembered all too well. This was how it had always started, the verbal confrontation that escalated to threats and then to violence. You're going to pay me what you owe, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. One way or another. Either you give me the money, or I'll take it out of your hide like I should have done months ago. That was when Vincenzo appeared. Sophia didn't see him arrive, didn't hear him approach. One moment Marcus was advancing on her with obvious violent intent, and the next moment a hand fell on Marcus's shoulder with enough force to stop him in his tracks. I think the lady asked you to leave, Vincenzo said conversationally. His voice was perfectly calm, almost pleasant, but there was something underneath it that made the hair on Sophia's arms stand up. Marcus spun around, ready to confront this new threat, but whatever he saw in Vincenzo's face made him step back involuntarily. Vincenzo was still wearing his usual expensive suit, still looked like a successful businessman rather than a street fighter, but his presence filled the space around him with barely contained menace. This doesn't concern you, pal, Marcus said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier aggression. This is between me and my girl. She's not your girl, Vincenzo replied, still in that same pleasant tone. And now it concerns me very much. You're disturbing my guests, threatening my staff, and generally making a nuisance of yourself. Time to go. Marcus looked back and forth between Vincenzo and Sophia, clearly trying to assess the situation. What he saw must have convinced him that discretion was the better part of valor, because he took another step back. This isn't over, Sophia, Marcus said, his words slurred but his meaning clear. I know where you work now. I'll be back. No, Vincenzo said quietly, you won't. Something in those 3 words made Marcus go pale. He looked at Vincenzo with sudden recognition, as if he was finally processing exactly who he was dealing with. Without another word, he turned and stumbled toward the exit, pushing through the restaurant's front doors and disappearing into the night. The dining room remained silent for several moments after Marcus left, the tension slowly dissipating as normal conversation resumed. Vincenzo moved to Sophia's side, his hand coming to rest gently on her arm. Are you all right? He asked, his voice completely different now, full of concern and protective warmth. Sophia nodded, though she was shaking. I'm sorry about that. I never thought he would find me here. I never wanted to bring my problems into the restaurant. This isn't your fault, Vincenzo said firmly. Men like that are predators. They don't give up easily. He paused, studying her face with those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. How long has he been bothering you? On and off for months, Sophia admitted. Ever since I left him. He shows up at random times, always wanting money or trying to get me to come back. I thought moving neighborhoods would be enough, but predators are persistent, Vincenzo finished. They don't stop until someone makes them stop. The implication in his words was unmistakable, and Sophia felt a chill that had nothing to do with fear of Marcus. She was seeing yet another glimpse of the world Vincenzo inhabited, where problems were solved definitively and permanently. Vincenzo, she said quietly, I don't want you to, whatever you're thinking of doing, what I'm thinking of doing, Vincenzo interrupted, is making sure you're safe. Whatever that requires. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was soft but absolutely certain. I meant what I said before, Sophia. Everything I do is about protecting the people I care about. And whether you stay at Bellinate or not, whether you want to be part of my world or not, I care about you. More than I probably should. The admission hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Sophia's heart race. She could see the truth of it in his eyes, the genuine emotion beneath his controlled exterior. This wasn't just about her job performance or her relationship with Isabella. This was about something deeper, something that had been building between them for weeks. Vincenzo, she whispered, not knowing what else to say. He lifted his hand to cup her cheek, his thumb stroking gently across her skin. For a moment, Sophia thought he might kiss her right there in the middle of the restaurant, with staff and guests watching. The possibility both thrilled and terrified her. But before either of them could move, Vincenzo's phone rang again. He closed his eyes briefly, clearly frustrated by the interruption, then stepped back and answered the call. Yes, he said curtly. How bad? All right, I'm on my way. He ended the call and looked at Sophia with obvious regret. I have to go. There's been a situation at one of the other properties. The careful phrasing told her everything she needed to know about what kind of situation required Vincenzo's immediate personal attention. But as he prepared to leave, he caught her hand in his. Go straight home after your shift, he said. Lock your doors and don't answer them for anyone. I'll have someone watching your building tonight, just to be safe. You don't need to do that, Sophia protested. Yes, I do, Vincenzo replied. And tomorrow we need to talk. Really talk about everything. About what you overheard, about what it means, and about what you want to do next. With that, he was gone, leaving Sophia standing in the middle of the restaurant with her mind spinning and her heart pounding. In the space of 20 minutes, her entire situation had changed again. Marcus had found her, Vincenzo had defended her, and the careful distance she had been trying to maintain had evaporated completely. As she finished her shift and prepared to go home, Sophia realized that her choice between safety and love had just become considerably more complicated. Because whatever else Vincenzo Romano might be, however dangerous his world might prove, one thing was now absolutely clear. He would protect her with everything he had. The question was whether she was brave enough to let him. The first sign that Marcus wasn't going to give up came 3 days after his confrontation at Bellinate. Sophia was leaving her apartment building for work when she spotted him across the street, leaning against a lamppost with a cigarette hanging from his lips. He raised his hand in a mocking wave when their eyes met, his smile cold and predatory. Sophia's heart lurched with fear, but she forced herself to walk normally to the subway station. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her run. Throughout the day, she found herself checking over her shoulder, jumping at unexpected sounds, wondering if he was watching from somewhere she couldn't see. That evening, when Vincenzo arrived for his usual check-in, she considered telling him about Marcus's surveillance. The words were right there, ready to spill out along with her fears and the growing certainty that this situation was beyond her ability to handle alone. But every time she looked at him, she remembered their last conversation, remembered the pain in his eyes when she had told him she couldn't be part of his world. She had made her choice. She couldn't have it both ways, accepting his protection while rejecting everything else about who he was. So she smiled and discussed the day's receipts and pretended that everything was perfectly normal. Isabella, however, was not so easily fooled. The little girl had been unusually quiet since learning about Sophia's departure, picking at her homework and watching the adults around her with solemn, two knowing eyes. Sophia. Isabella said that Thursday evening as Sophia helped her with a particularly difficult reading assignment. Are you really leaving because you found a better job? The directness of the question caught Sophia off guard. Children had a way of cutting straight through adult complications to the heart of matters, and Isabella was particularly perceptive. It's complicated, sweetheart, Sophia said carefully. Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions. Isabella nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense. But her next words proved she understood far more than Sophia had given her credit for. Is it because of Papa's work? The kind of work he doesn't talk about? Sophia's hands stilled on the textbook. How much did Isabella know? How much had she overheard or pieced together from fragments of adult conversation? What do you mean, Isabella? I'm not stupid, Isabella said with 80-year-old dignity. I know Papa doesn't just own restaurants. I know that's why Mama died and why we have bodyguards and why Papa gets those scary phone calls. But he's still a good person, Sophia. He takes care of people. He takes care of me. The simple faith in Isabella's voice nearly broke Sophia's heart. This child had lost her mother to violence, lived surrounded by the constant threat of danger, and still believed unshakably in her father's goodness. Your papa loves you very much, Sophia said quietly. Everything he does is to keep you safe. I know, Isabella replied. And I think he loves you too. He smiles different when you're around, like he used to smile at Mama. Before Sophia could respond to that devastating observation, Isabella continued with the determined air of someone who had been planning this conversation. Will you come to dinner at our house this weekend? Papa said I could invite you, and I really want you to see where we live. Please, Sophia? It might be my last chance before you leave. The plea in Isabella's voice made it impossible to refuse, even though Sophia suspected she was walking into emotional territory that would make leaving even more difficult. Of course I'll come, sweetheart. I'd love to see your home. Saturday evening found Sophia standing outside an elegant townhouse in Beacon Hill, second-guessing her decision to accept the dinner invitation. The building was beautiful but understated, the kind of old-money elegance that spoke of established wealth and impeccable taste. Nothing about it suggested the dangerous world she knew Vincenzo inhabited. The front door opened before she could ring the bell, and Vincenzo appeared wearing dark slacks and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. The casual clothes somehow made him look more approachable and more dangerous at the same time, emphasizing the powerful build usually hidden beneath expensive suits. Sophia, he said, and the warmth in his voice sent familiar heat racing through her veins. Thank you for coming. Isabella has been talking about nothing else all day. He stepped aside to let her enter, and Sophia found herself in a foyer that managed to be both elegant and welcoming. Warm wood floors gleamed under soft lighting, and she could hear classical music playing somewhere deeper in the house. This is beautiful, she said, meaning it. Elena chose most of the decorating, Vincenzo replied, and there was no pain in his voice now when he mentioned his wife. I think you would have liked her. She had excellent taste in people as well as furniture. The comment carried implications that made Sophia's cheeks warm, but before she could respond, Isabella came racing down the stairs wearing a pretty blue dress and an expression of pure excitement. Sophia, you came. Come see my room and the kitchen and Papa's study with all the books. The tour that followed revealed a home that was nothing like what Sophia had expected. Yes, it was expensive and beautifully appointed, but it was also clearly lived in, loved, a real family home rather than a showplace. Isabella's room was a delightful chaos of books, art supplies, and stuffed animals. The kitchen was large and professional but warm, with evidence of regular use and a refrigerator covered in Isabella's artwork. Vincenzo's study was lined floor to ceiling with books, many of them in Italian, and featured comfortable leather chairs positioned near a massive fireplace. Family photographs covered one wall, showing happier times when Elena was alive and Isabella was even younger. You read all of these? Sophia asked, running her fingers along the spine of a volume of Dante. Most of them, Vincenzo replied. I've always loved books. They were my escape when I was younger, before I understood that some responsibilities can't be escaped. There was something in his tone that made Sophia look at him more closely. For just a moment, she glimpsed the boy he must have been, bright and curious and dreaming of worlds beyond the one he had been born into. The moment was interrupted by Isabella tugging at Sophia's hand. Come on, Papa said we could cook dinner together. He's teaching me to make Nana's marinara sauce. The kitchen scene that followed was so domestic, so normal, that Sophia found herself forgetting entirely about the complications that surrounded their relationship. Vincenzo proved to be an excellent cook, patient with Isabella's enthusiastic but inexpert help and clearly enjoying the chance to teach his daughter family recipes. Sophia found herself assigned to pasta duty, standing at the counter beside Vincenzo as they worked the fresh dough. Their arms brushed as they moved, and she became hyper-aware of his presence. The way he smelled like expensive cologne and something essentially masculine. Like this, Vincenzo said softly, moving to stand behind her and covering her hands with his as she worked the pasta machine. Feel how the dough should move. His breath was warm against her ear, his chest solid against her back, and for a moment Sophia forgot how to breathe. This was dangerous territory, this casual intimacy that felt so right despite everything she knew about the world he inhabited. Perfect, Vincenzo murmured, and she wasn't sure if he was talking about the pasta or something else entirely. Dinner was a revelation. The three of them sat around the kitchen table rather than in the formal dining room, sharing stories and laughter like any normal family. Isabella chattered about school and friends. Vincenzo told amusing anecdotes about restaurant customers. And Sofia found herself relaxing completely for the first time in days. This was what she had always wanted. She realized with stunning clarity. This warmth, this sense of belonging, this feeling of being part of something larger than herself. Watching Vincenzo with Isabella, seeing the gentle patience and obvious love between them, she began to understand why Isabella had such faith in her father's essential goodness. Whatever else Vincenzo Romano might be, he was a devoted father who would do anything to protect his daughter. And perhaps Sofia was beginning to think that wasn't such a terrible thing after all. The evening ended with Isabella falling asleep in Sofia's lap while they watched a movie in the family room. Vincenzo carried his daughter upstairs to bed, returning to find Sofia standing by the large windows that overlooked the back garden. "She's wonderful," Sofia said softly. "You've done an amazing job raising her alone." "I've had help," Vincenzo replied, moving to stand beside her. "Elena's mother, my sister Maria, good teachers. But lately, I've realized that what Isabella needs most is a woman who loves her for who she is, not because of family obligation or loyalty to Elena's memory." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was carefully neutral. "Someone like you." Sofia turned to face him, her heart pounding with the weight of unspoken possibilities. The attraction that had been building between them for weeks was suddenly impossible to ignore, crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. "Vincenzo," she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "I know what you're going to say. I know you've made your decision about my world, about what you can and can't accept. But I need you to know that tonight, watching you with Isabella, seeing you in my home, it felt like family. Felt like what we could have if you were willing to take that chance." The longing in his voice nearly undid her completely. But before she could respond, her phone rang with a shrill urgency that shattered the intimate moment. The caller ID showed her mother's number, and Sofia answered immediately. "Mom, what's wrong?" Her mother's voice was shaky, frightened. "Sofia, honey, there's a man here. He broke into the apartment and he's demanding money. He says he knows you, says you owe him. I'm in the bedroom with the door locked, but he's trying to break it down. Marcus." Sofia's blood turned to ice as she realized that her ex-boyfriend had escalated from surveillance to home invasion, and now her sick mother was paying the price for Sofia's attempt to handle the situation alone. "Mom, listen to me," Sofia said, her voice remarkably steady despite her terror. "Call 911 right now. I'm coming." She ended the call and looked at Vincenzo, who had obviously overheard enough to understand the situation. His expression had gone completely cold, all traces of warmth replaced by something predatory and deadly. "Where does your mother live?" he asked. "Vincenzo, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking," he interrupted. "Where?" Sofia gave him the address, her hands shaking as she gathered her purse and coat. Vincenzo was already on his phone, speaking in rapid Italian to someone who clearly understood the urgency of the situation. "Marco and Tony will meet us there," Vincenzo said as they headed for his car. "This ends tonight." The drive across the city passed in a blur of city lights and mounting dread. Sofia tried calling her mother back twice but got no answer, which only increased her fear about what they might find when they arrived. Vincenzo drove with controlled precision, his jaw set in hard lines that reminded Sofia forcibly that this man was not just a father and restaurant owner. This was someone who had built an empire in a world where violence was currency and weakness meant death. When they reached her mother's building, Sofia could see that the apartment lights were on but the curtains were drawn. Vincenzo's men were already there, two large men in dark coats who approached the car as soon as it stopped. "Third floor, apartment 3B, Vincenzo said curtly. "I want him alive but compliant. And check on the woman first." The men nodded and disappeared into the building. Vincenzo turned to Sofia, his expression softening slightly as he took in her obvious terror. "She'll be all right," he said quietly. "I promise you that." 5 minutes later, Marco emerged from the building with a thumbs-up signal. Vincenzo nodded and turned back to Sofia. Your mother is safe. Shaken but unharmed. The problem has been contained. What does that mean? Sophia asked, though she suspected she already knew. It means Marcus Kellaway will never bother you or your family again. Vincenzo replied matter-of-factly. Ever. The finality in his voice made it clear that this wasn't a temporary solution. Marcus hadn't just been arrested or warned off. He had been permanently removed as a threat, in whatever way Vincenzo's world deemed necessary. Sophia should have been horrified. She should have been appalled by the casual violence, the swift and brutal resolution to her problem. Instead, she felt only an overwhelming sense of relief and something that felt disturbingly like gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. Vincenzo reached out to cup her face in his hands. His touch infinitely gentle despite the violence he had just orchestrated on her behalf. No one threatens what's mine, he said softly. No one hurts people I care about. Not ever. The possessiveness in his words should have frightened her. Instead, it sent heat pooling in her stomach and made her realize with crystal clarity that she had been lying to herself for weeks. She didn't want to leave Vincenzo's world. She didn't want safety if it meant losing him and Isabella. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the fierce protection and passionate devotion he offered. She wanted to be his, completely and without reservation. Vincenzo, she said, her voice barely audible. Yes, I'm scared, she admitted. Not of you, not anymore, but of how much I want this. How much I want you. His eyes darkened with an emotion that went far beyond simple desire. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips were barely an inch from hers. Don't be scared, he whispered against her mouth. Be brave. Be mine. When he finally kissed her, it was with desperate hunger tempered by infinite tenderness. Sophia melted against him, her arms winding around his neck as she kissed him back with all the emotion she had been trying to suppress for weeks. This was what she had been fighting, this overwhelming sense of rightness, of coming home. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Vincenzo rested his forehead against hers, his hands still framing her face. Come home with me tonight, he said. Let me protect you the way you should be protected. Let me show you what it means to be truly safe. Sophia looked up into his eyes, seeing the promise there, the commitment to stand between her and anything that might harm her. This man had just eliminated a threat to her family without hesitation, had dropped everything to come to her rescue, had offered her not just protection but love. Yes, she whispered. Take me home. As Vincenzo's car pulled away from her mother's building, Sophia realized that she had finally made her choice. Not between safety and danger, but between a life lived in fear and a life lived with purpose. Between being alone and being loved. She was choosing love. She was choosing Vincenzo. She was choosing a world that was dangerous and complicated and sometimes violent, but where she would never again have to face her problems alone. For the first time in months, Sophia felt truly, completely safe. 3 months later, Sophia Chun Romano stood in the office above Bellinate, reviewing profit reports from 5 restaurants that now fell under her management. The numbers were impressive, but what struck her most was how natural this felt, how seamlessly she had transitioned from managing a single establishment to overseeing a significant portion of Vincenzo's legitimate business empire. Her mother had made a full recovery and now lived comfortably in the guest house on Vincenzo's Beacon Hill estate, cared for by a private nurse and finally free from the financial stress that had dominated their lives for years. Sophia had her own key to the main house, her own parking space, her own place at the family dinner table every night. The sound of running feet on the stairs interrupted her concentration, and Isabella burst through the office door with the boundless energy of a 9-year-old with important news. "Mama," Isabella announced breathlessly. "Papa says we can have my birthday party at the big house with a bounty castle and everything." Sophia's heart did its familiar flutter at hearing Isabella call her mama, a development that had begun tentatively 2 months ago and was now as natural as breathing. Vincenzo had been the one to encourage it, telling Isabella that family was about love and choice, not just blood. "That sounds amazing, sweetheart," Sophia replied, pulling Isabella into a hug. "Did you decide on the theme yet?" "Princesses and knights," Isabella said decisively. with real sword-fighting demonstrations from Papa's friends. Sofia laughed, imagining Vincenzo's men staging elaborate battle scenes for a group of 9-year-old girls. In anyone else's family, it would be an absurd request. In theirs, it was just Tuesday. We should probably talk to your papa about keeping the weapons educational rather than authentic, Sofia suggested diplomatically. Isabella giggled and skipped out of the office, presumably to negotiate the finer points of medieval combat safety with her father. Sofia returned to her reports, but her concentration was broken again minutes later when Vincenzo appeared in the doorway. He looked particularly handsome today in a charcoal gray suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, his dark hair slightly mussed from the October wind. After 3 months of living together, Sofia still felt that familiar jolt of attraction every time she saw him. "Busy afternoon?" Vincenzo asked, moving to stand behind her chair. "The usual chaos," Sofia replied, leaning back against his chest as his arms came around her. "Isabella's birthday party is going to require military-level logistics at this rate." Vincenzo chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "She gets that from Elena. Every birthday had to be a production worthy of Broadway." He pressed a kiss to the top of Sofia's head, and she marveled again at how naturally this intimacy had developed between them. There were no awkward adjustments, no uncomfortable moments of figuring out how to be together. They fit simply and completely. "Marco wants to discuss the Moretti situation," Vincenzo said after a moment, his voice taking on the carefully neutral tone he used when referring to business matters that touched on his less legitimate enterprises. Sofia had learned enough about Vincenzo's world to understand that the Moretti family represented a significant territorial challenge, one that had been escalating slowly over the past several weeks. She also knew better than to ask for details about matters that could potentially put her in danger through knowledge. "Will you be late for dinner?" she asked instead. "Shouldn't be," Vincenzo replied. "This is more of a strategic discussion than an active operation. We're trying to find a solution that doesn't require bloodshed." The casual mention of bloodshed as a business consideration no longer shocked Sofia the way it had in the beginning. She had come to understand that Vincenzo's world operated by different rules designed to protect family and territory through strength rather than law enforcement. It wasn't a world she would have chosen, but it was his world, and therefore hers. After Vincenzo left for his meeting, Sofia finished her work and headed home to prepare for Isabella's birthday planning session. The Beacon Hill house felt like home now in a way her small North End apartment never had. Every room held memories of the family they had built together. Every corner reflected the careful blending of their lives. That evening, the 3 of them sat around the kitchen table surrounded by party planning materials, creating elaborate lists and debating the merits of various entertainment options. Isabella wanted everything to be perfect, and Sofia found herself equally invested in ensuring the party would create magical memories for this child who had already experienced too much loss in her young life. "I think we should have dancing too," Isabella declared, adding another item to her increasingly ambitious list. "And maybe a chocolate fountain like they had at Uncle Marco's wedding." "Your birthday party is going to cost more than most people's actual weddings," Vincenzo observed with amusement. Isabella looked at him with 80-year-old logic. "But I'm only going to turn 9 once, Papa. It has to be special." "She's right," Sofia agreed, winking at Isabella. "Besides, we have to make up for all the birthdays we missed before I became part of the family." The words slipped out naturally, without thought, but Sofia realized immediately how much weight they carried. This was her family now, officially and completely. She wore Vincenzo's grandmother's engagement ring, bore his name in all but law, and loved his daughter as if she had given birth to her. Later that night, after Isabella had gone to bed clutching her party-planning notebook, Sofia and Vincenzo retreated to their bedroom. The space had been redecorated since Elena's time, transformed into something that belonged to both of them rather than serving as a shrine to the past. Vincenzo was unusually quiet as they prepared for bed, and Sofia could sense tension in his movements that had nothing to do with the day's business discussions. "What's wrong?" she asked, settling beside him on their king-sized bed. "Nothing's wrong," Vincenzo replied, but his voice carried a weight that contradicted his words. "I've been thinking about Isabella's party. about how happy she is, how settled we've all become. That's a good thing, isn't it? Vincenzo turned to face her, his dark eyes serious in the dim light from their bedside lamps. It's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Which is why I need you to understand that if anything ever threatened this, if anyone ever tried to hurt you or Isabella to get to me, there's nothing I wouldn't do to protect what we have. The intensity in his voice made Sophia's breath catch. She could see the fear beneath his words, the vulnerability of a man who had lost everything once and refused to let it happen again. Nothing's going to happen to us, she said softly, reaching out to touch his face. We're safe here. Vincenzo caught her hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. I love you, Sophia, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone again. I need you to remember that no matter what happens. Before Sophia could ask what he meant by that ominous statement, Vincenzo was kissing her with desperate passion, his hands tangling in her hair as he pulled her closer. There was something different about the way he touched her tonight, something that felt like memorization, as if he was trying to imprint every sensation into his memory. Their lovemaking was intense and emotional, filled with whispered declarations and promises that felt like vows. Afterward, Sophia lay in Vincenzo's arms listening to his heartbeat and wondering why she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. She woke the next morning to an empty bed and the sound of raised voices downstairs. Throwing on a robe, Sophia hurried down to the kitchen, where she found Vincenzo in heated discussion with Marco and two other men she didn't recognize. The conversation stopped abruptly when they saw her, and Vincenzo's expression shifted immediately to the carefully controlled mask he wore when trying to protect her from unpleasant realities. Go back upstairs, Cara, Vincenzo said quietly. This doesn't concern you. But something in Marco's face told Sophia that this very much concerned her. Before she could respond, her phone rang from the kitchen counter where she had left it charging overnight. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer despite Vincenzo's sharp warning to let it ring. Sophia Romano? Said an unfamiliar voice with a slight Italian accent. Yes, who is this? My name is Roberto Moretti. I believe your husband has mentioned my family. I'm calling to inform you that you're going to be taking a little trip with some of my associates. I suggest you don't make this difficult. Before Sophia could respond, the kitchen door burst open and four men in dark clothing entered with military precision. Vincenzo moved immediately to put himself between Sophia and the intruders, but one of them already had a gun trained on her chest. Nobody moves, nobody gets hurt, the gunman said calmly. We just want to talk to Mrs. Romano about her husband's recent territorial expansion. Vincenzo's voice was deadly quiet when he spoke. If you touch her, Roberto, I will burn your entire organization to the ground. The man Sophia assumed was Roberto smiled coldly. You're in no position to make threats, Romano. Your wife comes with us now, or we settle this the messy way right here in front of your daughter. At the mention of Isabella, something shifted in Vincenzo's posture. Sophia could see him calculating odds, measuring distances, preparing for violence. But she could also see the impossible position he was in, outnumbered and outgunned in his own home. It's all right, Sophia said, her voice steadier than she felt. I'll go with them. Vincenzo's eyes met hers across the kitchen, and she could see the anguish there, the fury at being unable to protect her. But she could also see his trust in her intelligence, his faith that she would find a way to survive whatever was coming. 24 hours, Roberto said to Vincenzo. You have 24 hours to consider our territorial proposal. Mrs. Romano will be returned unharmed when we reach an agreement. As Roberto's men escorted her from the house, Sophia caught one last glimpse of Vincenzo standing frozen in their kitchen, his face a mask of controlled rage. She tried to memorize the image, tried to hold onto the love she saw in his eyes, because she had a feeling the next day was going to test everything they had built together. The abandoned warehouse where they took her was exactly the kind of place she would have expected for a kidnapping, all concrete floors and broken windows. But as the hours passed, Sophia began to understand that this wasn't just about territorial disputes. This was about psychological warfare, about breaking Vincenzo by threatening the woman he loved. Roberto visited her periodically throughout the day, making conversation that was almost pleasant if you ignored the armed guards and zip-tied hands. He seemed genuinely curious about how a respectable woman like her had ended up married to someone in Vincenzo's line of work. He must be very persuasive, Roberto mused during one of these visits. Very charming. But charm doesn't stop bullets, Mrs. Romano. And your husband has made some very dangerous enemies. What exactly do you want from him? Sophia asked. Roberto smiled. Everything. His territory, his connections, his legitimate businesses. Everything he's built since he took over from his father. In exchange, you get to go home alive. The casual cruelty in his voice made Sophia's blood run cold, but it also clarified something important. This wasn't a negotiation. This was an ultimatum designed to destroy everything Vincenzo had worked for. That was when Sophia realized she wasn't going to wait passively to be rescued. She had spent 3 months learning about Vincenzo's business operations, about the network of relationships and obligations that held his organization together. She understood leverage and negotiation, understood how power flowed through channels of respect and fear. More importantly, she had learned to think like someone who refused to be a victim. When Roberto returned for his evening check-in, Sophia was ready with a proposition of her own. I want to call my husband, she said calmly. Roberto raised an eyebrow. I don't think that's wise. I think it's essential, Sophia replied. Because right now you're assuming you hold all the cards. But you're wrong. And if you want to walk away from this alive, you need to understand why. Something in her tone made Roberto pause. After a moment, he nodded to one of his men, who handed Sophia a phone. Vincenzo answered on the first ring. Sophia? I'm all right, she said quickly. But we need to discuss terms. Over the next 10 minutes, Sophia laid out a counterproposal that utilized everything she had learned about territorial agreements and family honor. She explained why Roberto's demands would inevitably lead to a war that would destroy both families, and suggested an alternative that would allow everyone to save face while maintaining their existing power structures. When she finished, there was silence on both ends of the call. Roberto, Vincenzo's voice came through the speaker with dangerous quiet. My wife has just offered you something I never would have. A chance to walk away from this with your family intact. I suggest you take it. The negotiation that followed was complex and carefully structured, involving territorial boundaries, profit sharing, and mutual non-aggression pacts. But the foundation was Sophia's insight that Roberto's real goal wasn't destruction but respect, recognition as a power player worthy of consideration. By the time Vincenzo arrived to collect her 6 hours later, accompanied by enough armed men to siege a small country, the agreement was finalized and Roberto was actually smiling. Your wife is a remarkable woman, Romano, Roberto said as he personally cut Sophia's restraints. You should consider putting her in charge of your diplomatic relations. The ride home passed in tense silence, Vincenzo's relief at her safety warring with what she suspected was wounded pride at needing to be rescued by negotiation rather than force. But when they finally reached the safety of their bedroom, when Vincenzo held her with shaking hands and whispered broken apologies against her hair, Sophia understood that what had happened wasn't about his failure to protect her. It was about her evolution into someone who could protect herself and their family when circumstances demanded it. You were magnificent, Vincenzo said finally. Brilliant and brave and absolutely magnificent. I learned from the best, Sophia replied, and meant it completely. She had passed the final test, proven that she belonged in this world not as a protected innocent but as a true partner. And as Vincenzo kissed her with desperate gratitude and renewed passion, Sophia knew that nothing would ever threaten their family again. 1 week after her rescue from the Moretti warehouse, Sophia woke to find Vincenzo's side of the bed empty. This was unusual enough to cause concern, since he rarely left their bedroom before she was awake. But the sound of hushed voices from downstairs suggested he was handling business rather than facing some new crisis. She found him in his study, standing by the tall windows that overlooked their private garden. Isabella sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, apparently drawing something elaborate while her father conducted a quiet phone conversation in Italian. Tutto è risolto, Vincenzo was saying. Si completamente. The Romano family keeps its word, and the Morettis will honor theirs. When he ended the call, he noticed Sophia in the doorway, and smiled with the particular warmth he reserved for mornings when they had survived another challenge together. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, crossing the room to kiss her properly. "How did you sleep?" "Like someone who knows she's completely safe," Sophia replied, meaning it absolutely. Isabella looked up from her artwork with the bright expression of a child who had been waiting patiently for the adults to finish their boring conversation. "Mama, look what I drew for you," Isabella announced, holding up a colorful picture that showed 3 stick figures standing in front of a large house. The tallest figure wore what appeared to be a suit. The medium-sized figure had long dark hair and a dress, and the smallest figure stood between them holding both their hands. "It's us," Isabella explained unnecessarily. "Our family. I made it to say thank you for coming back home safe." The simple drawing hit Sophia with unexpected emotion. This child had spent a terrifying day not knowing if the woman she had come to love as a mother would return, and her response was to create art celebrating their family bond. "It's absolutely perfect, sweetheart," Sophia said, kneeling down to hug Isabella properly. "I'm gonna frame it and put it in my office so I can see it every day." Isabella beamed under the praise, then returned to her drawing with renewed enthusiasm. Vincenzo watched this interaction with an expression that made Sophia's heart skip unexpectedly. There was something in his eyes, some decision or realization that hadn't been there before. "Sophia," Vincenzo said quietly, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" "Of course," she replied, though something in his tone made her suddenly nervous. They stepped out onto the study's private balcony, where the October morning air was crisp and bright. Below them, the garden showed the first signs of autumn, leaves beginning to turn gold and red against the manicured hedges. "These past few days, watching you handle the Moretti situation, seeing how you protected not just yourself but our entire family through sheer intelligence and courage," Vincenzo began, then paused as if searching for the right words. Sophia waited, her heart beginning to pound with anticipation she didn't quite understand. "I realized that what we have is more than just love," Vincenzo continued. "It's partnership in the truest sense. You're not just someone I want to protect anymore. You're someone I want to build an empire with, someone I trust with everything I am and everything I hope to become." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box that made Sophia's breath catch in her throat. "This was my grandmother's ring, passed down through 4 generations of Romano women. Each of them was strong enough to survive in our world, brave enough to love men who lived by dangerous rules." Vincenzo dropped to one knee right there on the balcony, opening the box to reveal an exquisite vintage diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the morning light like captured fire. "Sophia-chan, will you marry me? Will you be my wife officially and completely? Will you help me raise Isabella and any other children we might have? Will you stand beside me in whatever challenges come next?" The proposal was everything Sophia hadn't dared to dream about 6 months ago. Not just an offer of love, but an invitation to true partnership, recognition that she was strong enough to be his equal in every way that mattered. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, absolutely yes." Vincenzo slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, then stood and kissed her with joy and relief and promises of forever. When they finally broke apart, Sophia was crying happy tears that she didn't bother to hide. Isabella's voice interrupted their moment from the study doorway. "Did Papa finally ask you to marry him? Because I helped him pick out the ring and I was getting really impatient waiting for him to be brave enough." Both adults laughed at Isabella's matter-of-fact tone, and Vincenzo scooped his daughter up into a 3-way hug that felt like the official beginning of their new family configuration. "So you approve of this development?" Sophia asked Isabella seriously. "I've been planning the wedding in my head for months," Isabella replied with 9-year-old confidence. "I already know exactly what dress I want to wear as your flower girl." The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the small chapel on the Romano family estate in the Berkshire Mountains. It was an intimate ceremony with only their closest family and friends, exactly as Sophia had wanted. She wore Elena's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit, with Isabella's enthusiastic approval and Vincenzo's emotional blessing. Isabella did indeed serve as flower girl, walking down the aisle with serious concentration as she scattered rose petals with mathematical precision. Sophia's mother, now fully recovered and glowing with health, served as matron of honor. Marco stood as Vincenzo's best man, his usually stern face soft with genuine happiness for his oldest friend. When Vincenzo spoke his vows, his voice carried clearly through the small chapel. Sophia, you came into my life when I thought I had forgotten how to hope for anything beyond survival. You showed me that strength and gentleness aren't opposites, that love and loyalty can coexist with wisdom and independence. I promise to protect you always, but more than that, I promise to stand beside you as your equal partner in everything we build together. Sophia's own vows came from her heart without hesitation. Vincenzo, you taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice and commitment and courage. You showed me that I was strong enough to love without reservation, brave enough to choose hope over fear. I promise to love you and Isabella with everything I am, to support your dreams and share your challenges, to be the partner you deserve in whatever adventures await us. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Isabella cheered so loudly that her voice echoed through the chapel, making everyone laugh and perfectly capturing the joy of the moment. 6 months later, Sophia stood in the kitchen of their Beacon Hill home, one hand resting on her gently rounded stomach while she supervised Isabella's attempts to recreate Nana's marinara sauce recipe. The little girl had grown 2 inches since the wedding and gained confidence that showed in everything from her improved grades to her increasingly elaborate birthday party plans. Mama, is the baby going to like pasta? Isabella asked seriously, stirring the sauce with careful concentration. I think the baby is going to love everything you cook for them, Sophia replied. You're going to be the best big sister in the world. Isabella beamed at this pronouncement, then returned to her cooking with renewed determination. Through the kitchen windows, Sophia could see her mother working in the garden, finally able to enjoy physical activity after years of illness. The guest house had become a perfect retirement home, close enough for daily visits but private enough for independence. Vincenzo's voice carried from his study, where he was conducting a conference call about expanding their restaurant operations into Providence. The past 6 months had brought steady growth in their legitimate businesses, while his other enterprises had settled into stable patterns following the Moretti agreement. Just last week, there had been a brief challenge from a New York family looking to expand their territory, but it had been resolved with a single phone call and some carefully worded reminders about existing agreements. Their life was secure in a way that would have seemed impossible when Sophia first witnessed Vincenzo defending his daughter in that restaurant. The timer rang for the sauce, and Isabella carefully turned off the burner with the competence of a child who had been taught proper kitchen safety from an early age. She tasted the result with the serious expression of a professional chef, then nodded with satisfaction. Perfect, Isabella announced. Baby's first marinara sauce lesson is ready. As if summoned by the mention of food, Vincenzo appeared in the kitchen doorway, having finished his business call. He looked completely relaxed in dark jeans and a casual shirt, his hair slightly mussed and his face showing the contentment of a man who had everything he wanted. "How are my 3 favorite people?" he asked, moving first to kiss Sophia properly, then to ruffle Isabella's hair and inspect her cooking efforts. For favorite people, Isabella corrected him importantly. You have to count the baby too. You're absolutely right, Vincenzo agreed solemnly. How are my 4 favorite people? We're perfect, Sophia said, meaning it completely. Later that evening, after Isabella had gone to bed with excited plans for teaching the baby to cook, Sophia and Vincenzo sat together on the couch in their family room. She was curled against his side, his hand resting protectively on her growing stomach, both of them enjoying the peaceful quiet of their home. Do you ever think about how all of this started? Sophia asked. How one moment of standing up for what was right changed absolutely everything. Every day, Vincenzo replied. I think about how brave you were, how you risked your job to protect a child you didn't even know. I think about how that courage led us here, to this life, to this family. He paused, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been working that night, if Derek had been kinder, if you had chosen to stay out of it. But I didn't stay out of it, Sophia said firmly. Couldn't have. Some things are more important than safety, more important than keeping your head down and avoiding trouble. She shifted to look up at him, seeing the love and gratitude in his dark eyes. Besides, I was protecting our daughter. I just didn't know it yet. Vincenzo's smile was everything she had ever wanted to see, warm and genuine and full of promises for their future. As they sat together in the comfortable silence of their home, Sofia reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It had started with a single moment of courage in a restaurant, defending a little girl from an adult's cruelty. That one act of standing up for what was right had led to love, family, purpose, and a happiness she could never have imagined. Sometimes life presented you with a choice between what was easy and what was right. Sometimes standing up for someone else, even a stranger, changed not just their life but yours as well. Sometimes courage led to love in ways you never could have predicted. Have you ever had a moment where you stood up for someone else? Maybe someone you didn't even know, and it ended up changing your entire life? Maybe you defended a coworker, helped a stranger, or just refused to stay silent when something was wrong. Those moments of courage can lead to connections and opportunities we never saw coming. Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear about the times your bravery led to something beautiful. The sound of Vincenzo's phone buzzing with what was undoubtedly another business matter drew Sofia from her reflections. But as he answered the call with his usual professional efficiency, she remained curled against his side, one hand on their growing child and the other holding tight to this life they had built together. This was her family. This was her world. This was the love worth fighting for, the happiness worth every risk she had taken to achieve it. And as Isabella's laughter echoed from upstairs where she was supposed to be sleeping, Sofia knew with absolute certainty that she would make the same choices again, defend the same little girl, choose the same dangerous, wonderful, perfect man. Some stories began with once upon a time. Theirs had begun with a moment of courage in an elegant restaurant, when a waitress named Sophia Chun decided that protecting an innocent child was more important than protecting her job. Everything beautiful that followed had grown from that single choice to do what was right instead of what was safe. And they lived, not happily ever after in some fairy tale perfection, but happily ever forward in the complex, challenging, deeply satisfying reality of a love that had been tested by danger and proven strong enough to last forever.